Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with veteran Kansas City Hammond B-3 musician Ken Lovern. We talked to him on March 18th, 2021 about quite a bit. We got into how the Kansas City jazz community is doing during the COVID pandemic, the reawakening of the Green Lady and Black Dolphin, the strength of the jazz world, and most importantly, the lasting legacy of longtime saxophonist, pianist, educator, and great guy in the jazz community, Joe Miquelon. Enjoy the interview.
Good to hear from you, Joe.
Good to hear from you, man. Thanks for taking a minute out. I appreciate it.
Oh, you bet.
I guess first and foremost, before we get to Joe, how's everything been going? I mean, we're hitting that anniversary point of this year. You're obviously on the forefront of being a nightly live musician in this town. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I mean, it's been a strange year in terms of not working our regular gigs for, a year. It's been pretty much a year to the week since we quit doing our regular gigs. We did those streaming gigs in the fall at Black Dolphin, and that was good, but we were doing, 2-hour shows, reduced capacity shows, and did those for a few months. But, occasionally we'd have to cancel for various reasons. There wasn't enough staff or, it was kind of hit or miss. We're starting to do shows again, and then that's just a matter of trying to make it safe, and trying to feel safe while we're doing shows again. A whole new set of challenges. I mean, so yeah, it's pretty wild. How are you guys doing?
Good, man. I mean, I just actually got my vaccine on Sunday. I got the Johnson & Johnson vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of reminds me of when the way this pandemic is kind of undulated is, it's like the walls started kind of moving in around November. There was a lot of people that started getting either the corona or were going to funerals or things were really ramping up and it was getting serious. And it's kind of like with the vaccine now, it was a few 2-3 weeks ago, everybody was like, do you know anybody that's got the shot? It's like, no, not really. And now it's like Arrowhead's opening, they got a big event on 18 and Vine, and it's just people that are getting their shots all over the place, which can only be totally positive, because at this point right now, if we're getting vaccinated, numbers are going down, and we're doing what we need to do to curb this, then hopefully clubs will start opening up, people will start getting out, and we can start getting back to living our lives.
Right, yeah. I got a call from John Scott a week ago Sunday, and the patrons had just started to kind of demand live music,
Yeah.
And they weren't doing it yet. And he called me on Sunday and it's like, we need to start live music this coming weekend, which was last weekend now. And so Sunday night, I'm on my computer trying to figure out a way where I can get a vaccine. Just because if I'm going to be out playing gigs, I felt like I needed to be vaccinated. And, I was able to find one. Drove to Trenton, Missouri.
Yeah.
They seem to have them. There's Hy-Vee pharmacies all over, and the ones. So I know some other friends have gone up to St. Joseph to get them. Getting out of the Kansas City metro area seems to make it a little easier in a lot of cases.
I've heard that too. People going to Sedalia and getting to other areas.
Yeah.
When I get,
my sister went to Sedalia. Yeah.
One way or another, I think things are going to start happening. The weather is going to turn. I remember when the weather turned last year, it was kind of a sea change. So hopefully things will open up. But I honestly, man, throughout this whole thing, I've been thinking about you guys down at the Green Lady. I mean, talking to musicians from around the world and hearing what's been happening to the club scene and all of that, I've been real, Kansas City has been thriving for a long, long time now, and the cornerstone of that has been John and the Green Lady and the Black Dolphin, and that has to be a survival mechanism for the jazz community.
I mean, it's pretty amazing he was able to survive. I mean, I don't know exactly how he did it.
Yeah.
I think he was able to, rack up some debt and keep the rent paid enough that the landlords didn't start screaming eviction.
Yeah.
And he actually did okay most of the time, but it was late November, and I listened to the KU medical doctors, and I heard some doctors saying, hey, I just left an ICU that was at capacity, and I went by a restaurant, and every table was full,
Yeah. Right.
And that's when I was like, man, I'm not comfortable playing gigs. I think we should stop. And, we did our last one of those streaming gigs, our December 5th. And we didn't do any gigs until last weekend. And for a while, the city had him shutting at 10 o'clock, and he couldn't make it. You know, when they were having to close at 10 at 50% capacity, he was dying. But that only lasted like a month or so. And then, you know, he's been able to just scale things down and make enough money to pay the rent, essentially. And now he's scaling things back up.
Good. Well, and that's beautiful, because when I think about the landscape of Kansas City, he is the beacon of jazz and live music and keeping this scene going. So I think that's wonderful that everything's good and he's ramping back up. And I didn't realize these hours, like I was talking to Max Groove about it, and he was like, you know, those last 2 hours when you can stay open late, that's where you make all your money. And I just didn't even think about that. I'm not in that business, but that's huge, you know, because you're novice out there. It's like, well, it's just 2 hours, but that's when people start getting out and buying drinks and getting the money flowing, you know.
Yeah, they do a lot of business, and even on the weeknights, you know, it'll get dead on the weeknights sometimes as it gets late. But man, we did those sequel gigs till 1, and then we did them till 1:30 for a while, and people would just be pouring in the door at 1:30, 2 a.m. when we were loading the gear out. You know, I was always kind of surprised by that, but it's the only place in town on weeknights that has music that late. And on the weekends, you know, after 1 or so, 1:30, it's only Green Lady, and then, you know, the Foundation opens up at 1 or whatever. So that late night thing has really been a niche where, yeah, they make a fair amount of money in those last couple hours, you know, where just because they're the only thing that's still going.
The one thing I've thought about over this year of hearing so many voices of jazz musicians and seeing how all of this has unfolded, it's been very, very overwhelmingly, the voices have been positive, the very encouraging. I continue to get CDs in the mail. Music is being made at a steady clip, and that's just from what I'm seeing from the outside. Right. What are you seeing? And I'm going to take this a step further. How do you see what the jazz community has gone through that's going to make them stronger when we do start returning in earnest?
Well, I think the creative aspects have really continued in terms of, you know, the musicians weren't able to play public gigs, but they kept streaming gigs. And I know a lot of people, you know, did a lot of composing and maybe projects they didn't normally have time for. I know I did. I've been working on composing. When we were doing those streaming shows in the fall, we started doing all original music at them. You know, Brian Baggett and I and Danny Embry, we all started writing tunes, new tunes, because we wanted to play all originals. And we had time to do it, where, you know, in normal times, we didn't have as much time to do that stuff. And so I just think people had time for creative projects that maybe they wouldn't have had time for without the pandemic. You know, and people seem to utilize it fairly well. I mean, I watched a lot of live streams and was pretty impressed with the stuff people were doing.
And I've been noticing that kind of the sonic soundscape has kind of changed a little bit. I've heard a little bit more of electronica elements. You know, Eddie Moore's been doing stuff. The Freedom Affair has been a great story for Kansas City, you know, kind of on a national level. There's been a lot of things that I think have continued, and you know, I'm thinking almost from the perspective of, you know, after 9/11, everybody thought there was going to be this sea change that was going to stick. I think after this, there is going to be a sea change for the live music community. If we didn't have music and we didn't have TV, movies, and art, can you imagine how dark this period would have been?
Yeah, it you know, I think it made a lot of people aware of how much they really enjoy and kind of need live music. I was watching streaming shows. A lot of people were watching the streaming shows, but I was never completely satisfied with them either, compared to being able to hear a band live and feel the low frequencies and feel the consciousness in the room of people are improvising live music and immediacy and the presence of live music. I think a lot of people really appreciate that and learned how much they missed it. And I saw that comment a lot, and I still see it, of where people are really looking forward to being able to experience live music again.
You know, I'm trying to stay positive about all of this, but I guess one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you, you were the first one that I saw about Joe and his legacy and who he was. And I don't have a lot of strong memories of meeting or seeing him, but I'm sure I did. I think about this last year, of all of the people we've lost in the world of jazz. I mean, you go from, nationally, you got Jimmy Cobb and Ralph Peterson recently. There's so many people, and then we get local here, and we lost Molly, and now Joe. Wow, I mean, I don't even know what you can say with the amount of musicians that we've lost in the world of jazz over the last year.
Right, yeah, Chick Corea.
Yeah.
There's a long list, and it's a part of life, right? I mean, people come and people go, and so I always try to be grateful for, the music that people were able to bring, and, the artist's life they were able to live and their chance to make music. And I try to, focus on being grateful for that, but sometimes it's easy to be sad when your friends aren't here anymore. I think that's especially true on the local scene, when it's actually our friends. I mean, yeah, I can celebrate the music that we did together, but it's certainly a personal loss to have people, your friends gone.
Talk to me a little bit about Joe. From what I understand, that there's nothing about him that was anything more than spectacular. Just the way he carried himself, who he was, how he was. Talk to me a little bit about Joe and your history with him.
Yeah, he was just such a positive guy, and I was really struck when he passed of how many people, had that impression of how he had been a major influence in people. He taught a lot of lessons, had a lot of students who were very successful. He had that same influence on a lot of his peers and other musicians, because he was always so excited about music. He was always learning and working on stuff. I mean, the guy, he had that teaching studio over in the Tune Shop, or Village Music Academy now, and he literally had papered the walls with transcriptions he had done. It was pretty much, he had a pretty big space, and it was covered, and the hall was covered with, he just did a ton of transcriptions of both, keyboard players and saxophonists, He really just had a very refreshing commitment to learning about music and enjoying music and having a passion for it. And, it was contagious. And that's one of the reasons that, I enjoyed hanging out with him, was that, it was contagious to absorb some of that stuff. And when my daughter needed piano lessons, when we wanted to get my daughter doing piano lessons, that was, she took lessons from Joe for several years. And that was a cool way to reconnect with him. Well, we met in the mid-'80s, late 80s. He was playing, I think we met down at the Hurricane Jam Session, which was at that time was the Kansas City Blues Band. It had started at Blaney's, but then moved across the street to the Hurricane, which is really more of where I remember hanging out with him. And he was playing sax with the band. At first I think he was just sitting in, but then he was a part of the house band. And I think that's really where I got to know him, because I'd get up and play a couple tunes, and then I'd hang out, and then I'd play tunes. And so I got to really know him. And at the time, he was playing with the New Rhythm, which was the successor band to Blue Rhythm Band, which was a reggae band. And I remember going over to his Midtown house and learning stuff about reggae keyboards, learning how to do the bubble, and doing these different reggae keyboard parts. And Joe had a lot of knowledge of that stuff. And then he was playing with Little Hatch at the Grand Emporium. Little Hatch was a blues harmonica player, and
yeah,
very rootsy. I don't know. Do you know anything about him?
Oh yeah, Little Hatch was prolific. Yes.
Okay, so Joe was doing that gig, playing mostly keyboards, but I think some sax. And Joe did that for quite a while, and they did the Grand Emporium, like a Friday happy hour, but they also did clubs in North Kansas City and different things. And I went out to several of those jams. And, then I'd go over to Joe's house, and he'd show me these Otis Spann, these old, early rock and roll or blues piano licks. He knew that really, he would just really go into depth learning authentic stylistic devices. And so it was really fun to get together with him and share musical ideas. He really had a very deep knowledge of a huge variety of styles.
Yeah, that's the thing that's interesting about a cat like him. It reminds me of that kind of old world of Kansas City. I mean, you start looking at what he's done, and you got Tony DePardo's Chiefs End Zone Band, the Elders, Ida Macbeth. There's so many people. He almost represents that era, even like from what Jay Mashan was from and all of that. So I guess my question is, he almost seemed like he was a bridge from that old world to the new world. And he's going to he kept all of those old vibes alive and brought it to the newer generations. Is that kind of the impression you got, especially being an educator?
Yes. And Joe and I, he was just a touch older than me. We got to do jam sessions with, a lot of those old guys, and Sonny Kenner and, just a lot of the old guys that had been around Kansas City. And Joe was real quick to absorb that stuff and get with those people. And yes, he was particularly good at bringing that stuff to the next generation, because he was a very busy teacher. He had a lot of students, and he was, really great at pointing them in the right direction. And, he had developed his own teaching materials where he broke down some of the more sophisticated elements of jazz theory in some pretty digestible ways to deal with it. But he would teach students all sorts of ways. I mean, my daughter was basically a beginner to an intermediate piano student. And but Joe would teach people jazz. He would teach them blues, whatever they were interested, whatever the student was interested in. Joe could take them there. But he did have an ability to connect with older musicians and musicians from previous generations. He could hang with them, and so he's a bridge to the people that were playing music in the middle of the 20th century. So before he was born.
Yeah, right. So you had a really powerful Facebook post on him, and I guess my question is just kind of your final thoughts on the legacy of Joe, kind of encapsulating that notion, and just in general, how would you sum up how you feel about Joe and what we've lost in Kansas City, because he's gone now?
Well, he was just so easy to love. He was just a very lovable guy. I think he was like his senior class president, and he wasn't an athlete. He was just, I'm pretty sure he was a band geek. He was just such a positive energy guy and such a light. He was really a bright light. We're really fortunate that he settled in Kansas City and got to share his gifts with so many people. And he was, very generous with all of his knowledge, and someone that made the scene better in a myriad of ways. And we're going to miss him.
So before we go, I just kind of want to touch a little bit on, as we start moving towards a more hopeful, brighter, post-pandemic world that we're in, how do you see Kansas City waking up, jazz waking up, getting back to the live venue? How do you see that unfolding?
Well, hopefully safely. I think, a lot of clubs have kept it going the best they could, and right now it's coming back still with, the clubs in reduced capacity. And so that's a little bit of a trick for the clubs to be able to afford live music, to pay the bands and make enough money, right, at reduced capacity. So it's hard to scale down and survive, I think, as a business. And it's also challenging to scale back up, right? So I'm really grateful for all the clubs that have kept the live music going, and the ones that are reinstituting it now, and the ones that have been able to survive and keep it going. Hats off to those business owners, because it hasn't been easy for them. And then certainly it hasn't been easy for the musicians. Most of us have been, out of work to a large degree, or doing work we're not usually doing. I'm really hoping that by the middle of the summer, by that soon, relatively soon, I can't really put a time on it, but relatively soon things will be, close to normal, where we can all feel safe and experience live music in the environments we're used to having it in.
So when that day comes and you're back on stage along with all the other musicians and the crowd is back, what do you hope we all collectively realize? Silver linings, things we keep with us about this absence away from the live music world?
Well, I think just how precious it is, and how grateful we all are to be able to experience live music, as listeners and musicians. And it's something that, when something's taken away, it's helped me realize how precious it is. And so I think maybe that's, the piece of learning is that, how really crucial and important, live music is, and we should do what we can to foster it and facilitate it and treasure it, because we've all now had some experiences with it being taken away, to one degree or the other.
Ken, thank you for talking about Joe, this world of music. I look forward to seeing you cats back at it in the live environment.
Thanks so much, Jeff.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview. We give you a bit of insight into the finest cats in Kansas City and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Ken for his time, wisdom, and dedication to Kansas City music. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.